Hello, friends. Welcome to Off-Nominal with just one of your regulars here. But don't worry, I've brought some old friends of the show. Tanya Harrison, has been a long time since you've been on an Off-Nominal production. How's it going?
Great, how are you?
I'm good. I'm running a little single-handed. Jake's away for like a month. He's basically taking a sabbatical, so, you know, I figured that's the perfect time to have a completely Mars-focused show. Which is great. We've got Chris Carberry here, Humans to Mars Summit, Alcohol in Space, the book we talked about last time. We'll talk about documentary this time. How's it going, Chris?
Doing well. Very busy, but very well. Thank
you got a couple of projects going on at the same time, which is good. So
more than a couple.
So that's the perfect time to join me on the internet for a drink, probably too early. And I know you were debating drinking straight out of a bottle before the stream started.
I was. It has been that sort of couple of weeks. I might just go right to the bottle, but I decided to go with a glass instead.
That's classy. What you got? What do you got over there?
I'm drinking Ardbeg.
Oh, look at that.
Nice.
Ardbeg whiskey. They were the first whiskey to age in space. Up on ISS from 2011 till 2014. Scottish whiskey from Islay.
Was that a particularly set length of time, or was that just when they could get rides?
It was kind of a strange story because they only had 2 weeks to prepare, so they had to get together this really quickly designed and not very well designed probably experiment that went up. Then it was only supposed to stay up, I think, until like 20. It was only supposed to be up for like a year or two. Then it was there until 2014 because it wasn't able to return at the right time. So, but then they found the final results was that it tasted a lot different than the ground sample. It had this kind of fishy, rubbery taste to it, which is not exactly what you like in your whiskey.
Is that what you've got right now? Does it taste like fish?
It does not taste like fish.
Okay,
it's smoky.
Good. Okay, nice.
Yeah, I have to admit, I don't. If I probably would not want to drink the space flown version. I'm not really into fishy, rubbery whiskey.
Did they figure out why? That's a weird.
I think it wasn't really a byproduct of aging in space. I think it was probably a byproduct of handling. It was up there longer, and it was so quickly designed and didn't really take into account all the extreme handling, the return and everything else. So I think other things happened that were separate from just the aging process.
Huh. Well, we're going to have to sort that one out in the future.
Yeah, well, there are companies. There's another company that's had an experiment up there, actually since 2014. They brought one back, Suntory, the Japanese whiskey company, but they've been very closed-lipped about their experiments. So I don't know how much impact there's been, but other companies have tried aging, not just whiskey, but there were bottles of Bordeaux that went up in 2019, and that seemed like a better experiment. And apparently there were differences in the taste. So, so a lot of
they all taste like fish, it turns out.
And it didn't taste like, as far as I know, it did not taste like fish. I love my Bordeaux to taste like fish as well. So,
Tana, do you have any fish tasting alcohol with you today?
I don't, but I have a drink in honor of Jake, actually.
Ooh.
So I'm sure he's not paying attention because he's on sabbatical. But this is a non-alcoholic cocktail called the Saskatoon. So he's actually from Saskatchewan, but it's like Canadian themed. It's
close enough.
Yeah,
it's close enough.
The same, right?
Yeah.
Tart berry,
it's at least not Ontario, so it's probably fine. Like it's close enough. Yeah.
It's tart berry, black pepper, Douglas fir tannins, and fellowship. So I think it's supposed to taste sort of like Saskatoon berries because I don't really think of Douglas firs when I think of Saskatchewan. But it's quite lovely if you're looking for a non-alcoholic cocktail.
Look at that. Fancy. I got some crazy looking beer from Yards called Bit Viper. This thing's like pretty well. I feel like that's a reference I'm missing. It's like kind of game themed, but I don't know. It says it's got citrus with a lot of S's, so I enjoyed the comedy on the box, and I haven't had it before, so cracking it open.
We'll be curious to hear, or not hear, well, hear as well, but hear from you what it tastes like.
Probably fish or snakes is my bet, based on the label.
It tastes like snakes, okay.
Before we get into the topics of the day, which NASA also landed one on us pretty timely with the opening of the Moon to Mars office that I'm interested to dig into a little. Are either of you going to Space Symposium by any chance? You're not. Okay.
I am.
So big news on the Off-Nominal front. I'll be out there. We just started announcing this stuff this week. I will be out there posting up at the Redwire booth, and we'll be doing a bunch of live shows on the floor. So there's going to be it's a lot of Anthony, because there will be 5 episodes of Miko and then an episode of Off-Nominal over the course of April 18th and 19th. So we're still booking some people out. We've got some good people confirmed already. We've got Lori Garver, Peter Beck, Karina Dries of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. We'll be posting some more names throughout the next couple weeks as we get confirmations. People's schedules are in flux, so we're like nailing that all down. But if you will be out there, we're going to be having our first live show. So it's a bummer that Jake decided that this is the time to take a sabbatical, but here we are. I'll be flying solo without him, but I wanted to throw that out up front.
I'll definitely drive by at your booth.
Yeah, well, so the good news is the Off-Nominal one is timed with the happy hour at Redwire's booth. So if you come by, that'll be Wednesday afternoon, happy hour timed. We will be doing some regular old Off-Nominal shenanigans. I printed a bunch of stickers. I've got these I printed like little mini cards. So I got swagged up. So it's going to be fun.
You have to find some brewery to partner with to make special Off-Nominal beer that you can have for events like this.
Okay, first of all, there was once a plan that Jake was going to homebrew beer, and then he moved to Mexico, so I feel like that part fell apart. Second of all, yes.
In Mexico?
I mean, he could, but I feel like I don't know if he's got the same kind of setup.
He shifted to tequila?
He just spends too much time outside now, before it was a lot of inside time, so... I don't know.
It seems like he's just eating and hanging out with iguanas and stuff all the time. It looks beautiful. Like, I want to move to Mexico now.
I got to at least go there. But, yeah, we totally do need to get some beer. One of our, I think it was our 4th or 5th episode, a company sent us beer. We had our one and only sponsorship. It was, I think it was Ninkazi Brewing or something. Per our first part of the conversation, they flew... what did they fly on? They flew some suborbital hops or something.
They flew on a suborbital flight. I think it was Up Aerospace. Yeah,
that's right.
And they got to suborbit and flew yeast up into suborbit. Yeast. And then, after the first experiment, they lost it for some period of time in 100 and whatever degree Fahrenheit heat. And so that first experiment was pretty much ruined. The second one succeeded. They got back efficiently, and then they used that yeast or the descendants of that yeast to create their beer, ground-controlled beer.
Yes, that's the one. So we drank that. It didn't taste like fish. It was delicious. But all I'm saying is that was literally our 4th or 5th episode, and no one sent us beer since. So we must have done a terrible job at plugging it or something. No one took us up on this. But Tanya, you are now in charge of the Off-Nominal beer brand. So if you can... do some outreach. You're well located in the Pacific Northwest to find the right partners. So congrats.
I'm on it.
Chris, last time we were here, you had a book, and now you're taking it up a notch. Please tell us about the current state of your culture in space and related properties. What's going on?
Yeah, Alcohol in Space is being turned into most of the interviews have already been done, but turned into a documentary film, which will be out later this year. But we'll be having a screening event at the upcoming Humans to Mars Summit in May. And so it's largely giving the story of all these companies that we might be mentioning. And if you're going to play it, we can listen to it. And would you rather do that right now?
Fire it up.
I can talk about it after the show.
Yeah, let's fire it up here.
Chris is a pioneer. He brings the humanity into this human story.
Alcohol has been a part of human culture from the very beginning.
You want to break some rules, so people do. You want to rebel a little.
Montrer que c'est possible de boire du champagne en apesanteur.
We have the solution. We made only 2 prototypes, very much alike, and the 2 prototypes failed completely.
Let's send yeast to space and brew with it. It worked. What didn't work is us not finding the rocket for 28 days.
So that's how it all came about, Sam. It was bonkers mad. It was such a short period of time I had to work with.
To be called single malt Scotch, you have to be matured for at least 3 years in Scotland. So we would have had to have tried to claim space for Scotland.
On a une expérience qui est fabuleuse, qui n'est absolument pas...
Uh-oh. I got buffering. What's going on here? Oh, here we go. It's back. Sorry for the interruption.
reproductible sur Terre.
Mais le plus incroyable pour moi, c'était de déguster. Vous savez, à gravité zéro, vous avez plus d'apesanteur, donc vous avez le vin tapisse tout votre palais. Et en plus, on a une sensation que je n'avais jamais connue, c'est le croquant de bulles, parce qu'il a fallu percer les bulles, claquer les bulles, puisque physiquement, il a fallu exploser les bulles pour avoir le liquide. Et c'était une expérience vraiment unique.
Jules Verne actually hypothesized bringing grapevines with them and growing vines on the moon, thinking that the ardent sunshine on the moon would create really wonderful wine vintages.
Why am I getting so much buffering?
This was the first time they were contemplating agriculture on another planet. This dream of Jules Verne would come true, at least having wine on the moon 104 years later, in 1969, when Apollo 11 landed and Buzz Aldrin actually consumed wine on the surface of the moon.
This isn't a bonus, this isn't a nice to have, this is what it means to be human.
It's space bootleg. Alcohol's been on every ship. Captain Cook stopped in Alaska to make beer.
We are bringing human culture up to space. People say, oh, we can't risk it. We can't risk not to have these things in space.
If we can allow astronauts to be not only machines, but to be people, not only surviving entities, but people, to create, even for a few minutes, a society of humans outside of Earth, then this is precious.
That is legit. That is real. Like, this seems an extensive amount of work, and I'm curious to hear about the timeline of this project in comparison to the book. And because it looks like you've got footage from all the missions that we heard about the last time we were talking about the book.
Yeah, and there'll probably be more also, because there have been other missions as well since then. But Sam Burbank, the documentary filmmaker who I've known for over 20 years, who's done a lot of documentaries for National Geographic, Discovery Channel, and on and on and on, is directing it. And we've been working on it probably about 2 years now. And so we're just finally getting to the point we're about ready to do screenings. The screening, as I mentioned, at the Humans to Mars Summit will be an early screening. There'll still be additional interviews after that, and hopefully it'll be ready for the official premiere by the end of the summer, early fall. And one of the things we're hoping to do, because one of the primary funders of the film was the champagne company Maison Mumm, who you saw quite a bit in that video. They have their special space champagne bottle going up on an Axiom mission in the fall. And so, hoping to do things related to that with screenings, here in the U.S. and in Paris and other places. But to mention, we're trying to cover all these different companies that are trying to use the space environment to improve their product for here on Earth, but also see if we can consume it in space. With Maison Mumm, they're doing it because they want to pretty much advance conviviality in space, which is basically what they do for a living. They say they try to advance conviviality, and they want to do it when there are space hotels and other human settlements. If people are going to drink, toast to their good fortune in space, they want them to be drinking Maison Mumm. However, I still haven't heard how they're going to deal with the whole carbonation issue, because carbonation and microgravity is not pleasant in most cases. So,
yeah, it seems like the astronauts had some not so great things to say early on, and I don't think they really enjoyed the taste of like the modified Pepsi that they sent in the 80s on the space shuttle.
They sent both Coke and Pepsi, actually.
Both, okay.
Because originally Coke was going to be sent, and then Pepsi heard, and complained and demanded to have Pepsi sent as well. So both Coke and Pepsi went up. But this also, interestingly, stimulated the first wine in space because the French heard that Coke and Pepsi were going up, and so they demanded a bottle of French wine go up first. So, so French wine did go up before Coke and Pepsi.
Oh, wow, okay.
So what was the one with the Apollo 11 wine? Like, do we know where that made its way
that's
from?
a good question. I don't know, because this was something, it was communion wine. I don't know what the brand was. Buzz had actually arranged with this church, the Webster Presbyterian Church, in Houston, to, with the communion wine, a goblet which is still at that church, and they have an annual ceremony honoring kind of the moon service up back in 1969. But I have to admit, I don't know what kind of wine beyond communion wine. So
I've heard the Webster, what was it called? Webster
Presbyterian Church.
Yeah, their communion wine tastes like fish, is what I've heard. This is a weird.
Jesus was a fisherman.
This is how Lent works.
He was a carpenter, but he was a fisher of men. But sorry, I didn't think I'd be referencing.
It's it's almost Easter. We're in the spirit here. Wait, what? I don't think I know this fact, Tanya, that it tasted weird or was modified. What did they change?
I thought they just made a non-carbonated version. Do you know, Chris?
Oh,
of what?
Of the Coke and Pepsi?
No, I don't think. I think when they did it originally, they didn't even do non-carbonated. I think that was part of the issue, which didn't go over well because I don't think they had consumed a lot of carbonated beverages prior to that. I think they had, but this was part of the reason why it wasn't a very good success, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yeah, if the non-carbonated version is like the stuff that you buy for SodaStream before you do the whole process? Gross. It's just that whatever that thing is.
Tap water.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's the non-carbonated Coke or Pepsi. It's just absolutely disgusting. So nobody wants that.
The zero-G flights that are in that are really fun because that's like already a compressed time scale to do experiments that don't involve trying to hold drinks in a glass. And I'm really curious, what that whole experiment was like. What was the idea? Try to figure out what the surface tension is, or what?
Yeah, well, that one was Maison Mum, and that one was actually not zero-G. It was the European version. I believe it's Nova Space that has an aircraft that does the same thing, parabolic flights. And they've gone up several times already, including one time, because they love doing the PR. They had the famous sprinter Usain Bolt come up and do a microgravity sprint on the airplane and then drink the champagne. This one, they were testing out not only opening the bottle, but these glasses, because in addition to, the champagne itself, they don't want their champagne consumed out of a sip bottle or even just put out in little balls in space. They want it to be authentic. And once again, how do you enhance conviviality in space? Well, you have a champagne glass. So they did have enough time to see how well the glass would hold on to the liquid. So that's kind of, one of the things they were doing, but also how the bottle was designed, opening the bottle in an efficient way. And they went through many, many iterations of this bottle. I was at the IAC in Paris back in whenever it was, September, at the Paris Observatory, where they Maison Mum announced their collaboration with Axiom. And they were showing all the different iterations of this bottle that came originally from an idea from Octave de Gaulle, who you saw in the video, who was part of, he was thinking during a graduate paper about sending wine up, and it slowly transformed, and then he partnered with Maison Mum, and they really grabbed onto it.
Okay, I don't know if I didn't see this in the footage, but has anyone done the champagne spray in zero-G to see what kind of propulsion we can get out of spraying champagne like you just won the World Series?
Not that I know of.
Right, I'm signing up to be part of that experiment.
Now that we have more commercial space, I think there certainly that's going to happen, and it'd be interesting to see.
I mean, it's essentially that scene from Gravity where she uses the fire, what's it called? Fire extinguisher. I don't know why my short circuit on a fire extinguisher. The worst scene in Gravity where she fire extinguishers her way over to the other space station. That's basically doing the champagne thing.
That's true.
I
So
just
maybe
wanna
we should, it should be advertised. It's not just a drink, but it's a different form of propulsion.
Yeah, it's if you're on a spacewalk and you get caught out there, just celebrate, I wonder how fast we could get going with that. It's a question. What is the ISP?
What's the cost ratio there?
Yeah, what's the ISP of champagne? Probably not
I can see a future experiment in development here. So anybody watching who wants to fund this experiment, I'm sure everybody here would love to do that.
Oh yeah, we are. Well, you're going to need at least 3 or 4 of us. So
yes.
I think Have you ever seen anyone win a championship? You need a couple of people. So I'm thinking it's a good experiment. Were there any things that made its way into the documentary that you didn't have in the book, or that a storyline that you were hoping to get in the book and it's coming out in the documentary? Anything like that?
There are a number of people interviewed that were not in the book, and we're hoping to get, for instance, I mentioned earlier, like and it's not in the documentary yet. I'm hoping it will be in it. That I mentioned the Bordeaux that went into space. That flew in November of 2019. The book came out in October of 2019, so I obviously didn't get that experiment. But there are a number of new experiments coming out right now. There's a number of American whiskey and other producers are hoping to send the first American bourbon into space, and we might want to try to cover that. There's a group that want to do the first moonshine on the moon. And so it's interesting, all the different projects in development right now. There seems to be a lot of interest within the alcohol industry. They're just trying to figure out how they can get in, and how it can really advance their brand. But there is interest.
To some extent, it makes sense because the figuring out like the functionality and the things that you need to change is like a long lead item. So if you do want your products in like early, actual missions that are happening or actual hotel stays that are happening, you got to start figuring out now. You can't really wait for the hotel to be built and then figure it out. So granted, it's a lot cheaper to do these experiments than build a hotel. So there might be a little cart before the horse as we're experiencing right now.
And in the meantime, you get some novelty marketing aspect to it, right? Like you're always going to have people that want to try the weirdest wine, the most unique whiskey. They'll want to taste the rubber and fish flavor, even if it sounds disgusting, because they get to say that they tried it.
Yeah, and honestly, a number of the new companies are looking for that high-end market. The people will pay a huge amount. For example, this wasn't the primary reason for it, but one of those bottles of Bordeaux was sold for $1 million through Christie's auction house.
Wow. What's the highest wine has ever gone for ever?
No idea. So I should. I do follow those things, but I don't recall. But that's pretty high. That's one of them. So
yeah, someone Google it and put it in the live chat so we can see.
I just love thinking about someone's just looking at that like, that's the $1 million bottle of wine that I bought. And it's just like, I don't know, is it really nice wine or is it just kind of regular wine that happened to go to space?
Yeah, it's the kind, I kind of wonder, like, those bottles, of Jefferson's wine that were, raised, they were supposed to go to Jefferson, but, sunk. I don't know if those were sold off, and those probably went for a large amount. There are a lot of these historical bottles. To be curious to see how much they've gone for.
Well, maybe the Webster's fish wine has an opportunity if they still know where that bottle was that they poured Neil and Buzz's wine out of. That one probably would go pretty good. People love that.
Yeah,
kind
I
of
don't know
stuff.
where the bottle is, but I know where the goblet is. So,
let's talk about the summit. This sounds so. I want to talk about the summit, but also just generally like humans to Mars, because we're now in the full swing of the Artemis era. We're no longer debating like Artemis existing. We're definitely firmly in the Artemis era. So I'm curious to hear, is there generally like a theme or a vibe going into this time around with the summit? What's the layout?
Well, I think theme is we're going, Artemis 1 is flown, Starship looks like it's about to fly also. Of course, today they announced, the first head of the Moon Mars Project Office, Program Office. And this is an office and a this is an office that we've been advocating that would be created for probably since the mid-teens. This has been a constant theme, in our op-eds, in our meetings with Congress, meetings with NASA. We've been pushing this. So we were quite happy when it finally was announced through Congress. And then today, of course, with the announcement of the first head of the office. So that's a major step. All of these things make a difference because trying to focus it, because I think even with all the extraordinary progress we've made with hardware and all the commercial activities and progress with the Artemis program, it sometimes still seems not to be as focused as we'd like it to be, and it's still unclear. All right, when are we going to land on the moon? When are we actually going to land on Mars? The current NASA plan is no later than 2040. Well, we'd like a little sooner than that. And when they say no later than 2040, I can't help but think that means probably in the 2040s. So we need to have more ambitious timelines. But having somebody whose job it is to really focus the program like that can help so that, we get things more efficiently and you build more interaction integration between the mission directorates at NASA, which, work together, but they often have a history of being siloed and don't always work together, but as well as working with all the partners, whether it be the commercial industrial partners or the international partners as well. So I think it's a great step, and hopefully this will just continue all these milestones.
As the representative of all the professional Martians, Tanya, I'm curious to hear where you're at right now with not only the human side, but there's this budget request out there that's got the Mars sample return. We need this amount of money, but it's probably going to get more expensive. Ingenuity's been kicking ass, so I feel like there's some good and some bad in the current Mars storyline. So what are the things that you're keying on right now with both robotic and human?
I think the sample return community is certainly extremely excited. This is the first time we're going to get samples back from Mars that we actually know where they came from, compared to Martian meteorites where we know they came from Mars, but we have no context to put them in. So it's kind of like handing somebody a random rock and saying, tell me the whole history of the Earth from this rock that I didn't even tell you where it came from. But at the same time, we're seeing kind of a halt in the rest of Mars exploration because we don't have any future missions on the slate after Perseverance and Ingenuity. There's been talk of this Mars Icemapper mission for quite a while. We talked about it at a panel at Humans to Mars last year, but NASA pulled out of their part of the participation, and the mission can't really move forward as it currently stands with the other international partners. The main science instrument would be provided by Canada, a radar instrument to map out ice, which we obviously need for humans. So there's a lot of hope that maybe NASA will come back in on Icemapper because it's really going to help fill in the gaps in knowledge that we need to pick the best human landing sites. We've got data on this from things like Mars Express and Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, but it's still very coarse resolution data. And it would be really great to get just a little bit more information to get a better idea of, yes, this is where we're going to send humans. This is a great place to actually start developing hopefully permanent infrastructure. Because if you're going to all the expense and time and effort to send humans, let's start out right. Let's put the stuff in the right place to begin with. So
I couldn't agree more. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm hopeful. I think that it feels like there's positive momentum in the direction of maybe Icemapper will become a thing again. So I think we're all just kind of waiting on the science side, okay, what's the next mission going to be separate from the whole Mars sample return architecture?
Yeah, Explore Mars is really a big fan of Icemapper, so we're certainly going to be advocating and have advocated for it because it makes so much sense. And this is one of these programs not really that expensive, and NASA is one of the rare cases where it's a true partnership, and NASA isn't paying for the majority of it. Majority of the money is coming from the partners, but NASA obviously is a key partner. So it just makes sense to figure out where the resources are, where the best places, as Tanya mentioned, to land humans when we send them. And so this is one of our top policy priorities, making sure, Icemapper gets back, back in the list of NASA projects, and hopefully we can get back to that really, really important mission.
There's the other angle, the Rosalind Franklin, that has kind of become like a geopolitical thing now, right? That for a little while it seemed like it might just go away when the war broke out, and then it seems like at some point everyone was like, yeah, we should just make a point and put this thing on the surface, and like both have the thing on the surface and make a point of it. But and I know early on when we were talking about the delays that Jake was saying, well, by the time it gets there, is it still going to be able to function? Is it still going to provide the science return that it was hoped for? I haven't seen like a latest timeline on that, but that's, again, it's another thing that NASA's chipping into, and they put it in the budget this year, the contribution, but it is a little bit longer of a timeline. So it's just kind of weird how this stuff is laying out. And I guess I know for a while there was thought that the communications infrastructure at Mars was going to be a real choke point, that we were going to run out of orbiters to relay things through. And I feel like the only reason that's not more of a hot topic today is, like you said, Tanya, there's not another big thing on the horizon other than sample return. But it still feels like a huge risk, or am I outdated on the current operations out there?
I mean, the newest satellites that we have, at least on like the NASA side, at this point are almost a decade old. And a lot of the satellites that we're using for like the main workhorse of comms, you're talking like Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and Mars Odyssey. Odyssey is really old at this point. I mean, it's still trucking along, but you could lose these satellites at any time when they're this old. And so you lose one of those, that's a huge blow to the amount of data that you can send back. There was actually a workshop, I forget when it was now, late last year, where NASA basically invited a bunch of folks, or JPL, I should say, the Mars Exploration Program, so NASA and JPL, called industry out to Pasadena. And they're like, here are the things that we need help with because we're investing so much money in Mars sample return. We need the industry to, can we convince you guys to chip in on these other things? And part of it was high resolution imaging. So what's the follow on to HiRISE? Communications infrastructure, weather monitoring, and I think the fourth thing was, or if I recall correctly, it was like propulsion technology. And it was interesting in that there was not a lot of enthusiasm from the industry side of things, other than the folks that were already bought into Mars exploration, like SpaceX. But NASA also wasn't offering up any money. They didn't say we're going to launch something like the Martian version of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program. So I told some of them that afterward. I said, I don't think you're going to get excitement from companies until you tell them that you're going to put some money behind it. Right now, you're just saying it'd be great if maybe you kind of wanted to work on these things. And it's hard enough to sell the commercial aspect of lunar exploration just for the moon. But Mars is like a whole nother magnitude away, like in every sense of the word. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe from that meeting, they actually do decide to launch a commercial payload services program for Mars and see what kind of innovations we get on that side.
Yeah, that's interesting because we're also like getting into the ballpark now of being able to at least learn some lessons with how Eclipse has gone. And I was my hopes, I've been pretty negative about it recently in that it felt like they onboarded so many companies that it was a race to the bottom for pricing, and then the companies were just going out of business. The most recent award that went to Firefly that included this like transfer stage that would drop something off in orbit was north of $100 million for the contract, which was significantly more than the past couple task orders have been. So I don't know what's going on there. Maybe people are getting more realistic finally. But I do feel like if that continues to struggle, it does make the case harder for, can commercial companies, is there a viable way for the business model to work out to provide payloads to Mars, let alone the moon? I kind of wonder if part of the motivation on the communications side was like, all right, like down the street, everyone's making thousands of communications satellites. Can we have one? Like we just need one of them out of the 4,000 that these companies are making. So I don't know. It's such a weird spot because it's hard to predict demand because the timelines are so long that you have to predict the future and future demand, and it's not something I think that any of the companies that really have a beat on yet in that they'll take it up on their own. So yeah.
I mean, there's no incentive right now, right? There's no commercial benefit to sending a communication satellite to Mars on your own volition, or even like sending an orbiter to Mars. The environment there is so completely different. You can't just take a satellite that you've designed for Earth orbit and then put the exact same thing in orbit of Mars. It's not going to work. You have to understand the different atmosphere and orbital dynamics and all of that stuff. I see in the chat, Bradley says that there was an announcement about maybe a CLIPS-like program for Mars starting in the 2040s. I feel like this is where the government needs to jive a little bit better with how quick the industry works. Like that seems like such a lot of so much time to waste when you could be getting help from industry now by just doing a little bit of investment.
Yeah, that 2040s, that's useless. And one of the topics we have at Humans to Mars Summit is looking if there's a market for Mars. And communication satellites might be a bit of a push right now, and I agree with all of you. And that is one of the essential things, because we do not have sufficient communications for sent humans, since most of what we learn on Mars stays on Mars because of the trickle of data that comes back from the rovers. But we're looking at other aspects. About 5 or 6 years ago, I'm missing what COVID time right now, I guess, 2017, 2018, we had panels on, is there a market for Mars? Is there, will people make money in the near term? At the time, they were saying pretty much, no, maybe the moon, certainly low Earth orbit. But since then, we've seen a lot of change. It's not, we're like investing major investments that, it's hard to see what the benefits to companies are. Because might be a hard sell to say you should pay for this communication satellite around Mars, but other things, because everybody now sees that we have the transportation. I mean, it's not all done yet, but we're well underway. People believe we're going to Mars. Now they're realizing, we need a lot of other stuff to be able to go to Mars or anywhere else sustainably. How are we going to eat? How are we going to drink? How are we going to breathe? Medicine, artificial intelligence, resource utilization. And so a lot of companies are looking at all these challenges, these innovations required for sustainability on Mars that could also benefit Earth, that could be a market here on Earth. And not all these things are going to cost billions or hundreds of millions of dollars. Some of these things cost in the lower order of millions or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there are, even in the last few years, some venture capitalists who have been investing in Mars-related technology. I don't know what the failure of the Silicon Bank is going to do with that, but nonetheless, it was a major change from the previous time when people really didn't quite get it and didn't see how you were going to make a profit from Mars. But then they realized, you don't have to pay for the entire mission to Mars, then there's not going to be a profit on that anytime soon. But all these different elements required, there's thousands and thousands of technologies that when you look at a problem through the Mars lens, what sort of large leaps can you make in the technology that you wouldn't be motivated to do here on Earth, like in agriculture, other forms of food production or environmental systems, things like that you might realize, look at what we did for Mars. Now we can use it as a major improvement here on Earth and make a lot of money.
Similar, the space version of that is like, can we learn lessons here and make money here while then figuring something out for Mars? The topic that's age-old debate of like, how much can we learn at the moon before we go to Mars, is always an academic debate more than like a realistic debate, because we haven't really had a viable moon program either for a long time. I'm curious though, now heading into the meat of the Artemis architecture, the way that it's shaped out, are there areas that feel ripe for that? Because before there was, you remember, if you can put your mind back to when it was the Deep Space Gateway, and then there was this thing, the Deep Space Transport, that was going to be a like longer lived, what were they going to do, fly a mission for a year or two to like simulate a Mars transit effectively? That's has not been talked about ever since. It's totally gone. So I'm curious if there's pieces of the architecture that you look at as like, that's the Mars foothold here, or is it really the Moon to Mars program is kind of just hand wavy, like, well, it just means because we'll do the Moon first and Mars later?
I know that's been a big topic of discussion. It was in Explore Mars. It will be at the Humans to Mars Summit in May, but it's been one of the primary topics of our Achieving Mars workshop, and we just released the most recent 9th report 2 weeks ago. Just go to exploremars.org if you want to see that. But one of our primary tasks for the last several years has been working with the lunar community to figure out the best ways to utilize the moon to feed forward to Mars. So we're not So we're not just having a moon program and then, okay, we're at the moon and maybe one day let's start planning about how we're going to go to Mars and have a completely separate architecture. They're not perfect analogs to each other, but there's enough where as long as we keep both in mind, we're planning for Mars and the moon at the same time. This is what we've been pushing. And so there are a number of places where this can work with, with life support, dust mitigation, although there are different types of dust, of course. It's a lot sharper on the moon. But, even some aspects of land, entry, descent, and landing is different because there's no atmosphere on the moon. But, on the terminal phase, last phase of landing, there's a lot of similarity. So they are looking at a lot of these systems on how we can effectively use the moon to get to Mars. Because we generally, with our group, we're realistic. We don't think we need to go to the moon, but we're happy to get back to the moon as soon as we can. And if we're going there, let's find the best way of using it to advance getting to Mars and not becoming an obstacle to going to Mars, which it could very well turn into if we don't plan it correctly. But thankfully, in our talks with NASA, Congress, and everybody else, everybody seems to be on board with that approach. But once again, we'll see if that continues as more hardware is being built and as budgets, start getting bigger. Because the easiest thing to do for mission planners, and that's what happened back in the earlier plan, back when George W. Bush announced plans, for the moon and Mars, it quickly became a moon-only project. Not that we got to the moon, but it became more focused on the moon because of budgetary and some other issues. So we want to avoid that.
I think this is where having this new program office is really going to come in handy, since it'll mean it's not just this nebulous idea anymore of we're eventually going to go to Mars, but right now we're focusing on the moon. I think without that, it could be really easy for it to turn into the moon is basically an asymptote. And it's like, well, we have to do so many things here before we feel confident enough to go to Mars. So now we have somebody that can actually set that strategic vision and say, okay, we're not going to get stuck on the moon. There's stuff we want to do here, but we can't let that keep us from making that next step.
It kind of felt like that was even going to happen with the moon if a program office did not form, right? Like there's not been it's not like there was a moon office. There was none of those either. So that aspect is really interesting. The only thing that I would I don't know, I'm not going to argue for the moon over the Martians here, but the only thing that I would be concerned about is the way that human spaceflight programs become sticky in the budget. And, for all intents and purposes, the Artemis program would be farther ahead if there wasn't an ISS eating half of the budget. That's a pretty substantial amount of budget that they have to contend against. And that's, witness also the way that Artemis and the commercial space stations programs are fighting for budget, and Artemis is winning by a lot. So eventually, the Artemis wedge nudged out what was the future ISS wedge. But once we have infrastructure on the moon, and there's momentum to keep paying for that and keep building onto it and maintaining it, that's the next battle. Is all right, well, now the Mars budget needs to wedge in here, and that's problematic.
Well, yeah, and some of it has to happen sooner than later. And there have been they are spending money on some of this. Like there was, what's the name? I'm blanking right now on the program where they tested the aeroshell for landing on, large aeroshell for landing on Mars. And that was important because in one of our previous workshops, that was always named as the #1 long pole technology for landing on Mars, since the biggest thing we've ever landed on Mars is both the Curiosity and the Perseverance rovers at 1 metric ton.
This is what you're talking about, right? Lofted?
Yeah, lofted. Sorry, I just blanked on it. And we will have a talk.
Oh, why did you blank on the low Earth orbit flight test of an inflatable decelerator? That's just so easy to remember.
Rolls off the tongue.
I know. We will be having a talk on that at the Humans to Mars Summit as well. But we've only landed 1 metric ton with Perseverance and Curiosity, and those were lowered with a sky crane. We're not going to be doing that with humans. We're going to need to land with the mission parameters that NASA industry have put out. It's generally going to be like 20 to 40 metric tons, or SpaceX considerably more. So it's not a small problem, and we can't wait until we're just about ready to send humans to Mars and figure out how are we going to land? And then once they land, how are we going to get off the surface as well? So, yeah, you can't just wait until we're on the moon and then for a while and then start thinking, oh, now we're going to be planning for Mars. We have to really look at some of the technologies right now, and they are. So, but we need to do more of that.
Like we got a sky craning in the humans does sound pretty cool, and I
probably
thoroughly
won't be using airbags.
Yeah,
either.
that's true. If I had to pick airbag or sky crane, I'm going sky crane 10 times out of 10.
Like that's gonna end up being like, yeah, I feel like that's gonna become like the Martian equivalent of skydiving, just like riding on these sky cranes.
This is what I'm talking about right here. That's a off-nominal adventure. We gotta have an offshoot brand. That's that's gonna be sweet. You mentioned Starship a second ago, and that both feels like the cheat code for the Moon to Mars program office, and also still a little bit hand wavy at the same time. Of like, only because like, when's the last time you've seen a lot of talk from SpaceX directly about Starship outside of that cool render of everyone descending from the elevator, right? Like they're pumped on the Artemis contract, as they should be, because it's a lot of money and it's a high profile thing, and it would be completely epic if they land that insane elevator on land. But like the cheat code there is their whole program depends on doing the same kind of atmospheric entry back at Earth with Starship as they would need to do at Mars. So it totally is the cheat code. And that's good because like NASA needed to find a cheat code to like offset some of the cost, right? Because effectively they've found a way to make use of what private capital there is going into developing this system that's going to help them both at the moon and Mars. It's also a risk that if we lean on that too much and there's only a single company interested in building that kind of thing, like, I don't know, for instance, Lockheed Martin used to put out a lot of renders of Mars Base Camp, and I'm pretty sure they just launched a new company called Crescent that's like a lunar infrastructure. And I think Joe Landon's running that, who I remember talking about Mars Base Camp in the past. So,
they're still very much into Mars Base Camp. I just
I don't know that.
Like yesterday. So.
Okay, see, but that's not out there. Like no, they're not really talking that up, and I'm kind of interested in the fact that that has gone completely silent.
I think there's a lot of realism as well. I mean, I think Lockheed, particularly, and a lot of companies. I mean, I deal with all of them, and I think in many ways they're still more excited about Mars, but they also have to be realistic from a business perspective. The moon's coming first, so it's not, SpaceX. SpaceX has an advantage the way they're operated, the way Elon, operates, that they can pretty much, brand anything and talk about Mars all they want, and they operate differently than anybody else. But companies like Lockheed, Aerojet, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, they don't operate the same way, and so they have to look at this in the way: what is NASA doing? What is the most likely path forward? And how are they going to be able to get the contract to do it? So, yeah, I'm not surprised there's a little more focus on the moon lately, but I can guarantee, since a lot of the key people at these companies participate heavily in our programs, they are very excited and are just committed to making sure this isn't a moon-only program, that this truly moves us onwards to Mars. Because that's, Lockheed, as you mentioned, has this tradition, of going to Mars robotically. But nonetheless, it's a long-standing tradition. And so they certainly want to go, as well as all the others, get humans on the surface of Mars.
The other aspect that came out recently about Artemis is that they appointed mission scientists to some of the missions themselves, which I found kind of interesting, knowing Jake's grumbles in the past of like, what about the science? But another area maybe like Clips, Tanya, where are there lessons to learn now about like managing these programs? I don't know if you've talked to anyone recently about like, science is in a quagmire with Mars, as with like the sample return budget and all that. But are there things that we can actually sort out with the Artemis program to get that right before going to attempt organizing a Mars mission and trying to put science somewhere in the prioritization stack? Or is that like, I don't know, figure that out once it's actually happening?
I think the fact that they're even talking about it is a huge step, because there were never any science goals for human exploration when you talk about things like the space station. It was sort of an afterthought. We're going to use it to do stuff. Oh crap, what is that stuff going to be? Well, there's probably money in pharmaceuticals, like we could do things like that. Let's do some biology. But there've never really been like, what are the science goals behind human exploration? Whereas the science goal is like the number one thing that you define when you're proposing an actual robotic mission. Like the goal of Perseverance is to look for signs of ancient life. So now we're actually going to have that for the moon, not like an overarching Artemis, like we're going to do this, but actually thinking about what science do we want to do with humans beyond just the idea of we're going to send humans there to stay.
Right. And then we'll be there. Yeah.
what are they going to do when they're there? What questions do we want to answer that we couldn't do with rovers, or that, we scratched the surface with Apollo and now we're going to have people back there studying stuff in situ. What do we want to do with it? So I think even just the fact that they're doing this is a great first step for figuring out what we're going to do for Mars later.
We talked about the summit a bit. We got a couple minutes left, so I thought it'd be cool maybe to hear like, what's the deal? How do people, can they still buy tickets? What's the deal?
Oh, they can. We want as big an audience as possible to get the National Academy of Sciences building in Washington, D.C. If you haven't been there, beautiful building. It's worth going to the building even without a conference, but with a conference, it's even better. So, but we have a great program. It's May 16th through 18th, 2023, and a lot of great topics. If you go to the website, we're adding speakers every day, but, some fascinating conversations, including some new ones. Like one of the ones I'm most excited about is a session called Tradespeople in Space. Basically looking at so many years at conferences, forever we've had, of course, as we should have, the engineers, the scientists, and everything else. But for so many years, we had PowerPoint programs. Now stuff is being built, not just by government programs, but huge number of commercial programs as well. And of course, it's not the engineers that are generally bending the metal, but you have welders, machinists, pipe fitters, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're starting a program, starting it with this panel, but it's going to be an ongoing program to look at the people who are actually building the space programs, commercial and government, as well as what the challenges and opportunities are over the next few decades. Do we have the right pipeline for these high-skilled workers? And as I've mentioned to a number of people, I suspect that 99.9++ percentage people considering trades have no idea they might be able to work in the space industry. So we're just trying to kick this off and start talking about all the different elements and making sure that we can start connecting the dots within industry and within the groups, the companies, or at least the organizations that train people in these areas. So I think that's going to be a really interesting one. But we're going to be having updates on Artemis, as well as Artemis 3, when we actually land on the moon, but how that actually helps us get to Mars. But many, many, many topics. I don't want to go down the litany of topics because it gets a little bit tiresome. But, I think people take a look at the website. It's really coming together well, and we'd love to see you in person. We'll have, as I mentioned, also a screening of the Alcohol and Space film, preceded by a reception sponsored by Artbeg, a Scottish whiskey company. So that should be fun. We have some other things about to be announced as well. So people definitely need to be there in person.
I did see there's a session with your name on it, Tanya.
Yes.
Is that a thing?
It's got my old affiliation on it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Not updated for current status, but it looks pretty sweet. Lori Glay is going to be hanging out with you. You got you're around the globe on this one.
Yeah, talking to everybody that's got an interest in Mars science from a space agency standpoint.
Do you have anything you want to plug or mention, or should we move on?
I can't think of anything.
All right, great.
Hope to see you all in DC.
Yeah, I mean, May in DC is that's just a great time to hang out. So I'll have to, I think I might be traveling that time, but I got to figure out.
I was going to say, will you be there?
Oh yeah, you got to be there. And
come and do another live
bring the show there.
I know. Well, the problem is that I am already on the road, but let me look into it because I do need to be there. And I do love DC, and it's been a while since I've been to DC for a conference. Last one was ISE, I guess, right before COVID kicked in. So that was notably a great time. So I will mention next week, and this is somewhat Mars related. Next week on the show, we've got, you might remember Rocket Lab's doing a Venus mission. There's another company called Impulse doing a Mars mission. So we'll have Barry Matsumori, who is the COO of Impulse, on, and Eric Berger will be here with me chatting about what Impulse is up to.
He'll be at H2M as well.
Well, there you go. He's on the junket. We're officially part of the junket, I guess. So yeah, that'll be cool. Impulse, I kind of glancingly know from when they did this kind of media push when they announced that partnership with Relativity a couple months ago or something like that. It was probably in the fall or something. So that'll be cool to talk to. And of course, you got to come out to Space Symposium. Should be a good time. Space Symposium has always been one on my list to go to that I've never gotten out to, so I'm glad that it's happening this year. I'm sure there'll be.
The Broadmoor Hotel is really wonderful.
Yeah, looks pretty swanky. I'm
classic,
about that.
but they all nice modern facilities also. But the old classic hotel is wonderful.
It looks fairly swanky. I'm pretty pumped to see the chaos, and it sounds like it's. I mean, it's always felt like the conference I should be at because it's got such a bent on like business strategy and commercial stuff. But I'm sure. Is there stuff that you're looking forward to in particular, Chris?
Mostly just talking to people. There are a lot of good sessions always, but one of the main reasons people go there is because of all the people who are there. So looking forward to that, all the different side events. So it should be a lot of fun.
Sweet. Well, thank you both for hanging out. I will mention too the Off-Nominal Discord. If you've not checked that out, offnominal.com/Discord. You can join up, and there's always something good going down in there. And Jake's doing his sabbatical thing, so he'll be back in a while. So tweet at him and I don't know, give him some crap while he's out there and has time to spare. But thanks again, Chris. Thanks again, Tanya, for hanging out, and we will see y'all later.
Thank you.
Bye, bye.
Bye.